Good evening, and welcome to the Findlay City Council meeting dated October 6, 2020, a regular session of Findlay City Council. We will start this evening with the roll call.
Mr. Greeno?
Here.
Mr. Haas?
Here.
Mr. Hellman?
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Palmer?
Here.
Mr. Russell?
Here.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Here.
Mr. Slough?
Here.
Ms. Warnicki? Here. And Mr. Wolfser?
Present.
I now ask everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll now entertain a motion to accept the previous city council meeting. Mr. Slough.
I would move to accept the public hearing meetings of 1028 and 103 Bird Avenue rezone and approve the minutes as circulated.
Second, Mr. Schindeldecker. Any questions or discussion?
Should that be 10:30 Bird instead of 103?
Yes, clear. 10:30, yep, that's just on our agenda is incorrect, but I'm sure on the, all right, thank you for that. We have a motion and a second. All those I'm sorry, any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. They are accepted. I will now entertain a motion to accept the September 15th regular city council meeting minutes. So, Mr. Slough.
Move to accept the September 15th regular session of council as approved.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Those are accepted. Mr. Russell, do we have any add-on replacements or removal from tonight's agenda?
Yes, we do. We have a add-on. We have a letter from Water Director Rasmussen concerning legal opinion for the water meter project, and we want to put that in the reports of municipal officers and municipal department section, and also a replacement for ordinance 2020-120, just some substitute of an additional roadway paving information, and that'll be in the legislation section, and that is formed in a motion to add and replace.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion or questions? Hearing, I'm sorry, Mr. Greeno.
Yes. Is this the point to where we could have that letter read and put into the minutes? No.
That'll be at the end of municipal. We'll have,
Okay.
you can
Thank
make a
you.
motion for that then
Thank
when
you.
it's brought up. Thank
Okay.
you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of adding and replacing the two items as discussed, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. That is, we do have a recognition resolution.
First reading for Resolution 28, 2020. A resolution commending Jerry Snodgrass for his patriotism and steadfast support of veterans, service members, students, and athletes. Whereas Jerry began his career in 1977 as a teacher and coach of baseball, basketball, and football at Defiance High School before becoming a teacher and head boys basketball coach at Ridgedale High School between 1980 to 1982. Then as a teacher and middle school athletic director in the Bryan City Schools during the 1982 to 1983 school year, and finally as a physical sciences teacher at Findlay City Schools in 1983, where he also served as an assistant boys varsity basketball coach until 1991, before being promoted to the school's head boys basketball coach from 1998 to 1999. Overall, he spent 25 years at Findlay High School, the last 16 as a school athletics director. Whereas Jerry Snodgrass, who served on various positions with the Ohio High School Athletic Association, most recently as commissioner, established the Military Appreciation Night for all member schools of Ohio, which serve to recognize veterans during sporting events, making a positive impact on the community, resonating with all who attended the events. He was inducted into the Ohio Interscholastic Athletic Administration Association Hall of Fame in October 2010 and was selected that same year as a recipient of the OSHA's Naismith Matrius Service Award. You oversaw OSHA's nationally recognized Golden Megaphone program that promoted sportsmanship within student sections of members' schools' basketball games. And whereas during his 40-plus years as a teacher, coach, and mentor, Jerry provided an unwavering commitment to honoring men and women serving in uniform while encouraging patriotism and love of country, earning him the utmost respect and gratitude of the veterans of foreign wars of the United States. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Findlay, State of Ohio, that Jerry Snodgrass be and he is hereby commended for his patriotism, his support of veterans, service members, students, and athletes, and that this council wishes to extend its gratitude and respect to him, along with his being an outstanding citizen in this community. This resolution shall be enforced in effect from and after the earliest period provided by law.
Mr. Slough.
I move for adoption of Resolution 28-2020.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. I'm sorry, Mr. Russell.
Come on, guys, you gotta have some discussion on this one. I had actually walked in with Jerry, and so he knows mostly of what I'm gonna say, but Jerry had a tremendous impact on countless student athletes in coming through Ohio high schools, and especially Findlay High School, one of which was my son. And the work that he did and his fellow athletic directors have done, and the folks at the Ohio High School Athletic Association to give the opportunities, to make the opportunities happen for student athletes, and all the learning that can happen by being a student athlete. Most of it goes unnoticed, but not unappreciated. And I know that wrestling for my son was instrumental in him being a better student, him going to college, and him having a career now as a phys ed and health teacher in Colorado. And Jerry, as I said to Mr. Snodgrass on the way in, he's plays a big part of that. And so for the public to know, and Jerry, thank you from the bottom of my heart, the bottom of my wife's heart, and Frank, he might not admit it, but his heart too. So much appreciate your efforts for your career and the effects that they've had. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Jerry, it's been a long time. We've been working together for a long time. So I come at this a little bit different direction than Grant does. Grant had kids that worked under you. I personally worked under you, and I appreciate you not firing me from the first 10 years of my job coaching and having to deal with that. But I will tell you that from all the coaches' standpoint, that we had a great mentor and athletic director in that time frame who was supportive with a firm hand, which some of our coaches needed a firm hand at that time. Jerry, you'll remember, more so than others. But it is not an easy job. And Nate Wyrow is here with us, and he's going through a time frame that I wouldn't put on anybody, being an athletic director in this time frame for Ohio. And certainly appreciate every time and effort you put into this in the city of Findlay, and then again in Columbus, which I know was a job that you always wanted growing up, and did an awesome job up there or down in Columbus, and we certainly appreciate it here in our local area. So thank you very much for your time and effort.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
There may be more, but I know at least two of the 10 councilmen in this room tonight had sons that were athletes at the Findlay High School, and at least two, including Mr. Wobser and Mr. Palmer, who were athletes themselves. So we've been close to the situation, and we appreciate all that you've done for our children and for ourselves.
Mr. Palmer.
I was one of those student athletes that benefited greatly from Jerry's leadership at Findlay High School. Forever grateful. I had a time of my life wrestling at Findlay High. Thank you.
And I personally, just as a friend, appreciate everything. So, including all the sports stuff, but just you're a great guy. So, Ms. Mayor.
Well, wonderful. It's certainly my pleasure to recognize Mr. Snodgrass this evening. And as the comments were echoed and the resolution recognizes We certainly appreciate and recognize the profound impact you have had as a leader, promoting athletics, but also promoting community and patriotism. And certainly in a time when folks can so easily lose focus of and take for granted all of the benefits we have in this wonderful country and how they have been earned, we appreciate you continuing to make sure that's at the forefront of everyone's minds and recognize that when we settle in to enjoy a sporting event, it's because of all of those who have served our country each and every day. And so at this time, I would like to recognize and call forward Representative Cross and Senator McCauley. We each, on behalf of the City of Findlay, the State of Ohio, both the Senate and the House, and Mr. Snodgrass, if you could come forward. We would like to present to you a number of proclamations and resolution, and then I'd also like to recognize and welcome forward Bob Kroger, Gold Legacy Life Member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, a 22-and-a-half-year retired officer of the United States Navy from Defiance, and the National Deputy Chief of the State Staff of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Mr. Kroger, would you like to say a couple comments?
Sure.
First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Murr and the council for taking the time to honor Mr. Snodgrass, so I say coach. Again, also, do we have any veterans in here? Please stand and be recognized. My fellow comrades and myself would like to thank you for your service and your sacrifice. Thank you. Also like to thank Ron McCauley and John Cross for coming tonight also to recognize Coach. And also the athletic director, Nate, from Findlay High School. Again, it's truly an honor to represent Commander-in-Chief Harold Roach of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States of America, which is headquartered in Kansas City, and presenting special recognition to Jerry Coach Snodgrass. Also, on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief Roche, we'd like to recognize all veterans in attendance again. And pretty well read the citation before, and that's signed by the Commander-in-Chief, Henry Al Roach, and the Adjutant General, Evan Jones. Again, thank you for your time, and
If you'd like to come forward, we'll present the proclamations and resolutions.
Thank you.
Brian, could you take a couple of photos? Look at all, I have a whole
Hey,
wall.
I'll tell you what. I'll get up there.
We'll take one with Matt and then come on forward.
Come on in, get in there, Bob.
We'll present all of them if that's all right. And then we can take off masks. Just don't look at each other. Got it? And then would you like to have your other officers come forward? I know we have the local VFW. You guys can be recognized real quick.
That's a wall hanger.
Well, thank you again. Let's give a round of applause.
I did laugh a little bit here. I'd like to introduce my fellow comrades, the Senior Vice Commander of the Department of Ohio, Jim Hordinsky, and the District 1 Commander and Commander of Post 5645 of Findlay. Thanks for coming, guys.
Believe it or not, those guys got through the metal detector. Jerry, you're welcome to make any comments.
I will make a short comment.
Yeah, that's
because I
fine.
know you
Yeah.
have a long evening,
Feel
so-
free to.
So, thank you. First of all, thank you. I'm very proud to always have been a citizen of Findlay since really I started most of my professional career. But even during my time in Columbus, I said one of the best things that I had going for me was that I did live in Findlay. And I say that for so many reasons, that I didn't get caught up in just what Central Ohio was like all the time. And I saw how real Ohio worked. And, we sometimes take it for granted, but having worked for the state of Ohio, and I know that, you two have also, made your rounds around the state, but it is good here. And anything I could ever do to promote that, I did it. Very quickly, this award recognizes something that approximately 8 or 9 years ago, I was an assistant at the time at the Ohio High School Athletic Association. And my boss at that time, my predecessor in my commissioner's role, always said he was the best boss I ever had. He had no idea what I did, and he didn't care what I did. And I'm rather creative and sometimes off the wall, but my assistants loved working with me. So if you know that I spent 43 years in education, and proud of the fact that a number of those years were done not only in the classroom, but the extension of the classroom, and that's the fields, the courts, the pools, the mats that our kids play on, where education really takes place. I administrated the sport of basketball, and in the sport of basketball, trying to be creative, trying to be a little off the wall. I remember when I was coaching as the head coach here at Findlay from, I believe it was like 91 or 92 until 99. They weren't popular then, but we all of a sudden had a student group. We had some really good teams back then. Lamont Paris, who's currently the head basketball coach at UT Chattanooga. We had some great players during that time. Chris Ireland, whose son is a great player for Findlay High School right now. But we had a student section, and they became known as the Snod Squad. They didn't exist at that time. And when I was the head coach and also the athletic director, there were many times, Josh, you might have been in some of those student sections, and I'd have to turn and look at them just to they're on the edge. They're on the edge. But you know what? They were part of the evening. They were part of the educational process. They were part of not only for the teams, but also for the school itself. So when I went to the OHSA, I thought, you know what? Student groups were growing all across the state. Their nicknames are unbelievable. I'm a big social media person, and I follow every one of them on social media. Everybody from Ontario High School, they're called the Ozone, to there's some just crazy, the Nut House. There are all kinds of crazy terms. And they all have Twitter accounts, but they also all have leaders. And if you go to a high school ball game in the winter, they have theme nights. They have everything from tacky tourist night to Hawaiian night to beach night to farmer night, you name it. And they have fun. So my staff and I said, why can't we embrace that and just coax them into having one night where they all band together across the state of Ohio, and everybody, and I emphasized every school, support one thing and have one theme night. And it became known as Military Appreciation Night. And I'm floored to this day where it went. Obviously, you know that. I mean, the things, and my staff would go to games on a Friday night when they did the Military Appreciation Night, who they recognized, how they did it. The first call I had from a student group, what do you want us to do? And my answer to them was, I don't want you to do anything. I want you to do what you want to do. And it's amazing how it took off. And that's probably one of the most proud achievements that I have in my career, of encouraging students to band together and really show their appreciation. It was covered nationally. We got a lot of national recognition on it, and as well as statewide. Spectrum did a huge segment on it, but nonetheless, it was something that embraced kids, and I'm forever grateful for that. And I'm forever grateful for the fact that our students learn and use the educational process to recognize and thank our veterans for being able to act crazy on Friday night. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Is it the place with
All
the
right,
table?
so Mr. Hellman reminded me, if any of you were here for this evening's award recognition, you're welcome to leave. You're welcome to stay to see your local government in action. But you're also welcome to, I'm sure Jerry's buying wherever you want. Yeah, thanks, guys. Just gonna give them a minute here to,
Thank you, guys.
yes, Mr. Russell.
Point of order, should we vote on this?
I thought we did, I'm sorry. We had a motion, we had a second, we had discussion. All those in favor of the resolution say aye if your name is called. Those opposing it?
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye. That almost blew that, Jerry. You're good to go. Okay, let's move on. We do have one oral communication from a Mr. Rodney Seek, and he'd like to speak to the rezone of 519 Davis. Mr. Seek, I remind you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Well, first, thanks for your time. Glad everybody's taking interest in everything, and fantastic. Findlay is a special town to me, too. I have lived in pretty much every major city south of the Mason-Dixon, and I always come back to Findlay. It's special because it has the amenities of a large city without the problems of a large city. The biggest thing for me here is space. We have yards, kids, and pets can run and play. This proposal changes that. An out-of-town corporation wants to change property lines so they can build a duplex that will change the current residents' quality of life. It's been difficult for local residents to build a garage or a shed in this neighborhood because of watershed issues, yet a duplex. As to the quality of life, it's very quiet back there. I live there. There are currently 8 to 10 cars that use that alley. That's alley number 6. Sometimes more depending on friends and families. This is all that alley can accommodate safety. The duplex will also take away an area that kids and adults alike enjoy. As an out-of-town corporation wants to change property lines to build a duplex, at what cost to the Findlay property owners? It will add traffic to the alley. Noise from cars driving down the stone alley greatly increases. Our property, it happens to be right on, this alley thing. The danger of someone coming out of our address at 1115 and getting hit greatly increases. The dangers to someone hitting the building greatly increases. Don't want to sit in your living room and have a car come through on an icy day. Since an out-of-town corporation can change their property lines, I'm assuming local property owners in the alley will be afforded the same opportunities to rezone and build duplexes. That could make as many as 8 to 9 more duplexes. It raises the car count up the worst to 40 plus. At some point, alley number 6 will have to be changed to the boulevard of duplexes. Of course, people building in other towns, of course, the people building live in other towns, so it doesn't change their quality of life except the money leaving Findlay. Back to what it'll cost the local residents on the alley. The cost can only be guessed right now. It is a fact that two cars cannot pass on that alley without driving into someone's yard. The alley has to be widened. Problem is, where is the alley? Best I can find, the alley is 16.5 feet wide. Via current survey that the SRC group did for the 529, the property owners, the alley, his property goes into the alley. Measurements from that marker, 16.5 feet out, puts the utility pole of a very old mulberry tree well into the alley. That pole probably has an easement. Again, the cost to local owners is dependent on where the alley is. Parking lots may have to be built, fences may have to be moved. AC units may have to be moved. Barricades may have to be installed to protect the tenants and the building, not to mention permits needed, and will they be approved? All unknown until we know where the alley is. I would like to end tonight by asking for the preservation of our neighborhood's safety and quality of life by not rezoning this property. They do not live here and do not have to deal with it. Again, thank you for your time. Be safe. And you said it best. This is a very special town, guys. I can say that from my heart.
Good for you. Mr. Seek, just hang on. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Seek? Mr. Slough?
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch the address.
Just
519.
519 and 521, I think is the two.
525 and 529.
525 and 529.
525 and 529 Davis. And we would have been to the first hearing, but the letter we received had the, first, we didn't get it till the day of the hearing. Second, it's talking about 1028 Hurd and 1030 Hurd. I just went back through and looked at the lot numbers to figure out they were talking about 529, the Davis Street stuff. So miscommunication there of some sort also.
Any other questions? Mr. Russell?
You mentioned the changing of lot lines, and this went through planning and zoning, and I don't recall that there's any discussion of changing of lot lines. This is a rezone, so there's no change in this.
Well, you're taking two lots and incorporating them into one, correct?
No, they're rezoning the lots.
He has to straddle two lots to build that duplex.
They are rezone. We dealt with a rezone. This is a rezone. It's a change to an M2 district from an R2 district.
Yes, but what I'm referring to is if you look at the property lines, each of his duplexes sit on an individual property.
That's not the case in front of us. The case in front of us is a rezone. There's no change.
Gotcha. Okay.
And there's no change of lot line. So I'm not sure.
That'll have to be, I guess, for when they make the plan on what he's wanting to do. He has to straddle two properties. But there again, we're talking about the rezone. I'm asking that it not be rezoned.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Seek.
Thank you. Thank you.
At this time, I call forward our Senator McCauley. I think you had some general comments you would like to make.
Sure. Thank you for the recognition. It's great to be with all of you tonight. Generally speaking, for 10 seconds maybe if I could, it's great to be recognizing Jerry Snodgrass tonight, not only for his leadership of the OHSAA and also for what he did for veterans, but he was in a very unenviable position earlier this year dealing with the winter tournaments and the spring season. And even though he didn't want to make the decision, I think he showed true leadership by making the decision that he felt like he had to make, given the details and what he knew at the time. So sometimes leaders have to make those tough decisions, and I appreciate that you were in the position you were. But other than that, just wanted to come here and just kind of address you all briefly, talk a little bit about what's going on at the state level. Certainly, you've all been kept apprised, I'm sure, of the CARES Act funding that has been funneling to local governments here. And hopefully you guys will be able to put that to good use for the eligible expenses that are there. We would have done it all in one fell swoop earlier in the year, but we were hoping the Treasury Department at the United States government level would loosen some of those restrictions, and then we could get the money out under more loosened restrictions. But unfortunately, we were running out of time, so we wanted to get it out expeditiously after that. But I'd be happy to, I'm not sure what the format is, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody may have about that or any other issue going on at the state. Thank you.
Questions or comments for our Senator? Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I invite our State Representative Cross up to make some general comments.
Thank you very much, Council. It's nice to be with you all. And Jerry, congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you to your family and your friends, because you spent many nights away. And if you think it's tough to be an elected official, try being a coach in your hometown, right? It's certainly a challenging time. I think you probably had pretty good. You were a coach before social media, so you had it really good. Yeah. So thank you, Jerry. We appreciate it. Senator McCauley, first, you have a great senator. We work really well together, and he's doing an excellent job in the Senate side. And I think we're all anxious to get past the election, get back to Columbus, and get back to legislating. We missed a lot of legislation time due to COVID, obviously. But we have a few bills that we'd like to get done. Obviously, he talked about the CARES Act, but I'd also like to talk. I was with Speaker Cupp last night. We were down in Cincinnati for an event, and the question came up about the capital budget. And one of the items in the capital budget is, would we have a capital budget? And I would probably tell you today that we're looking at it. One of the recommendations would be is maybe not to fund some of the state or collegiate programs or university programs, but maybe focusing on the local projects that were requested. You know, if you want to have a great economic impact in your community, if we have the capacity to fund some of the local projects that the city has submitted and others around the state have submitted, we're going to try to do our best to encourage our leadership to take a look at that and see how much burden we want to take on, but something I think that's still in conversation. So we'll look at that. We'll look at some other legislation, and just regarding House Bill 6, the Energy Nuclear Policy Bill, an extremely complicated bill, one that was extremely complicated to put together. But we're looking at repeals and replaces and reconfigures and any other R word that you can come up with. But we are not rushing that, or at least my position is we shouldn't rush that, because we have to be very careful to make sure that whatever maneuver we do, we don't increase energy costs. There is a potential to have a $2.3 billion increase of energy rates to our ratepayers here in Findlay, Ohio, if we repeal the bill and don't do anything. So, you know, as I talked with CEOs of companies here in town and companies across Ohio, they tell us all the time we are not competitive when it comes to energy rates in the state of Ohio. And your economic development platform here in Findlay is based on good sites and good quality of life and good utilities and access to all those, but we also have to make sure that our energy costs are competitive amongst other states so we can continue to bring business and industry here. So we will work through that, just like any issue that we're working through, and get through that. So thank you very much for your service. We stay in constant communication with the mayor and have good working dialogue as we work through the legislative process. But pleased to hopefully get back for lame duck and get at least another 30-some days in to finish this General Assembly. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Representative Kress? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that completes our oral communication. We do have one written communication.
Regional Planning Commission report for September 16, 2020.
Questions or comments? Hearing none. Written communication will be filed.
Also, a reestablished non-conforming use request for 314 West Sandusky Street.
Questions or comments? To be filed. Reports of municipal officers and departments.
Officer shareholders disclosure form from the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Liquor Control for Rod and Cynthia Nelson Enterprises LLC, doing business as the Findlay Social, located at 330 South Blanchard Street, for a B1 liquor permit. Check of the records show no criminal record for those who applied.
Mr. Slough.
I have moved, no objection be filed.
Second, Mr. Wolfser. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor that no objection be filed, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. No objection will be filed.
A letter from Police Chief Ring regarding a donation from Findlay American Legion.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell.
I'd ask that this letter would be read into the record.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of having this letter read into the record, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Letter will be read.
Police Department received a $530 23-cent check from the Findlay American Legion as a charitable donation. The purpose of this check is to be used to pay for 3 exterior vest carriers for the Detective Division. I respectfully request the amount of $530.23 be appropriated from the general fund to the police department safety line as follows. From general fund, $530.23 to police department number 21012-000, 212-602, safety, $530.23. Thank you for your consideration in this matter. If you should have any further questions, please let me know.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell?
I'd just like to personally thank the Legion for their donation and for their thinking about our first responders, about our Findlay Police Department. It's very much appreciated.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, the letter would be filed.
A letter from Safety Director Schmelzer regarding electric aggregation program renewal.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, letter to be filed.
A letter from Mayor Mern regarding insurance payment for repair of sewer maintenance building.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, letter to be filed.
City Planning Commission minutes for September 10th, 2020, as well as the revised agenda for October 8th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Minutes and agenda to be filed.
Traffic Commission minutes for September 21st, 2020.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, minutes to be filed.
Findlay Fire Departmental Activities Report for September 2020.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, report to be filed.
A letter from Service Director, Acting City Engineer Thomas regarding Blanchard River Greenway Trail Extension, PID 106715, project number 319-80300.
Questions or comments? Mr. Hellman?
I have a question, if I might, and I think it's because I don't understand something, which happens occasionally. The statement that I read said that we were eligible for, what, an 80% refund? Is that right, Ryan? Or reimbursement?
Yes, that's one of the things I've done since I came here, was go through the ODOT process. We got a fringe rate established. We had to change some of our procedures in-house. So any of the projects that we get funding through ODOT for, we can get reimbursed for our people for their inspection time. So it's not a straight up 100%, but they will reimburse us for 80% of the inspection time on that. So we did run into some unforeseen conditions here with soil, so we had to excavate more out than we thought we'd have to, and that meant you had to put more stone back to make everything work out. So we are asking for an additional $25,000 for the project. But like I mentioned in my letter, for our inspection time, the amount that we're going to be requesting for the reimbursement was $10,000, I think it was $300.
Yeah.
So we will be getting that money back once we apply for that.
Maybe that's why I was confused. That's only for the inspection time then?
Correct.
Okay. Because I was wondering why we only asked for, what, 40% as opposed to 80%?
Yeah, because that's,
I got it now.
It's just however long our guys are out there.
I knew it was going to be my fault, but thank you for the explanation.
Any other questions or comments?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
No other questions? Let's see, that was a letter. Letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding Blanchard River Watershed Partnership.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding revolving loan fund board appointments.
Mr. Slouch.
I have moved to confirm Mr. Lane and Mr. Mayberry to the revolving loan fund.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of making the appointments effective through December 31st, 2021, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? They are confirmed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding designated outdoor refreshment area.
Question or comments? Mr. Russell.
The idea of the DORA is something that the DFID, the Downtown Findlay Improvement District, has discussed for about a year. It's something that the DFID is in favor of. There has been some discussion about possibly forming an ad hoc committee of council to further investigate whether a DORA is appropriate for City of Findlay. If we're going to do an ad hoc, I'd be the one that would assemble that committee. So I'm kind of looking for some guidance, some input from the rest of council as to if they desire to have an ad hoc or would rather just see legislation come forward for this.
Mr. Wilson.
Councilman Russell, I think that's a great idea. We need to look into this. honestly, having gone through what we've been through for the last 9 months, I wish we would have had this in place back at the beginning of the summer. So I think an ad hoc committee would be an excellent direction forward. Let's see what we need to do with this. I know the mayor's also done some work on it, or she wouldn't be coming to the podium.
For the record, I did indicate to President Harrington, he gave me the nod. So I did just want to comment that I would like to have an ad hoc committee, and the reason being is that the process includes me putting forward an application to council, which would outline the hours of operation, the boundaries, restrictions, sanitation plan, and security plan. And once that plan has been presented or application has been presented to council, no modifications can be made until it is voted on. And that's why I would like to have input and discuss the process and how we get public feedback on that. I agree it would have been great if we had had this in place. That's why one of the reasons we've worked with many of our downtown vendors to have sidewalk cafes and be a little more accommodating and being able to have those. Now that we've been able to work through those conversations a little bit more, hopefully this is something we can move forward and make sure that we work with our businesses long term. So would love to have an ad hoc committee to be able to get feedback before I propose legislation.
Mr. Hellman.
I guess I would concur with that, Mayor, and as well as with what Councilman Woopser and Russell have said. The ad hoc committee, I think, is a good idea. One of the things that confused me was the boundaries of the ad hoc committee. And I guess that can, boundaries of the door, that can be, I guess, discussed once you get the ad hoc committee together. But I thought it was large, and I thought it was a bit confusing.
So certainly, yes, that would be part of the discussion. I tried to keep it consistent with the Downtown Findlay Improvement District, because those are the areas that are already have a sanitation plan in place. The DFID pays to have a company come through and clean on a regular basis, along with our just kind of regular maintenance of those, as well as it includes the hotel, some of the areas that we hope to redevelop down by the river, down to the Performing Arts Center, and that whole area. So I figured it's kind of already a designated area, allowing it to fit those boundaries allows additional development in there. The one thing I didn't want to happen is to start leaving out businesses, so I would rather have it a little more broad than too narrow, where we're trying to revisit it on a case-by-case basis. But again, that is something that would be discussed in the application process, working with the ad hoc committee.
Mr. Schindler.
I would agree with that the area is rather broad, but looking at it and the rationale for it, I can see really no other way. Seems like that's just about what it ought to be. It is rather broad, and it does concern me somewhat, but I would vote for it if it comes to that.
Mr. Wilson?
Councilman Russell, if you're looking for people to be on this ad hoc committee, I would volunteer to do that.
Oh, Mr. Slough?
As would I, as part of the downtown is my district.
Why don't I do this, Mr. Russell? Anybody interested in pursuing a position on this ad hoc, why don't you raise your hands and he'll take note of it. He'll contact those that have their raised hand, and he'll leave the ones without their hand raised, which doesn't look like anybody.
8 to 2.
It's 8 to 2. So Grant, I think you've got.
I want to know what's wrong with Beth and Danny.
I figured you guys could handle it.
I think they might be the two smartest ones of that group. You never know. So there's plenty of interest in serving, and I'll leave that to your discretion on who you choose. So, thank you. Any other discussion on the letter? Okay, thank you. Letter to be filed.
City Income Tax Monthly Collections Report for September 2020.
Questions or comments? Hearing none, collection report to be filed.
Letter from Law Director Rasmussen regarding legal opinion on water meter project number 357-83300.
Mr. Greeno.
Yes, I'd like to have this read into the minutes, please.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of having this letter read into the record, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Please read the letter. Thank you.
I have been requested to render a legal opinion regarding the ability to award the water meter project number 357-83300. In rendering this opinion, I have reviewed all relevant bid documents, and it is the opinion of this office that the Honorable Council of the City of Findlay may proceed to award the water meter project number 357-83300. I know that the auditor and perhaps some council members have raised concerns regarding the water meter project. I would like to address these concerns. The first of these issues deals with the fact that the criteria engineer failed to notify the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. This notice is procedural in effect and has nothing to do with the substantive issues regarding this matter. This notification did not ensure or otherwise guarantee that any specific bidder or bidders would have or could have responded to such an inquiry. However, the engineer did advertise in all the usual places and/or publications pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, as has been done for years. The fact that 3 qualified firms submitted 3 quality proposals together with another firm that declined to submit its proposal is proof positive that there was adequate public notification of the project. With regard to the development of actual bid specs, I have reviewed their communications and have discussed the process with both Brian and Jason. It is my opinion that the specs were fairly and appropriately developed and discussed with all parties involved in this process. The owners, taxpayers, and contractors are all beneficiaries of competitive bidding laws and protections. The goals of competitive bidding are to ensure that the public gets a good contractor for the project and at the best price, and that the process is fair. However, whether the bidding was competitive from the bidder's viewpoint is not the issue. The issue really is whether the bidding was competitive from the city's viewpoint so that the public would obtain the lowest and best price for the project. In my opinion, this was accomplished. In the unlikely event a rejected bidder would seek judicial review of a decision by a public authority pursuant to the bidding statutes, the court must apply an abuse of discretion standard. In other words, the court does not substitute its judgment for that of the public authority empowered by statute to make the award. Rather, even if the court disagrees with the public owner's decision, it should not disturb the decision unless it finds an abuse of discretion. So what does that mean? An abuse of discretion means more than a mere error of law or judgment. It means an unreasonable, arbitrary, or unconscionable attitude. Arbitrary means without adequate determining principle, not governed by any fixed rules or standards. Unreasonable means irrational. Dayton ex rel. Sandrick versus McGee, 1981, 67 Ohio State. In this case, there is no abuse of discretion present. In other words, regardless of whether the court would have reached the same conclusion, the court is limited to determining whether the decision is one that a rational person could have made based on information available at the time. This places a high burden of proof on the bidder challenging the decision. Merely arguing that the public owner weighed the information incorrectly will not suffice to overturn public owner's decision. Finally, and most importantly, the legislative power of each city is vested in and exercised by the legislative authority. If council votes to proceed with this project, all elected officials and city personnel will be bound by its decision, including the auditor. It is my opinion that the city of Findlay may proceed to award the water meter replacement project number 357-83300.
Questions or comments? Mr. Greeno.
Yes, I guess the question is for Jim. Does this letter satisfy your criteria for the bidding process, Mr. Sashak?
Thank you for the question. My responsibility as city auditor was to review the process and lay out all the issues appropriately, and I've done that. Having raised the issues, I recognize it is the responsibility of the law director to review. And since that time, he has written this opinion. I will respect the decision, having raised the issue. As to the matter in front of you, I will defer.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none?
No.
I'm sorry, Mr. Green.
So basically, according to this letter, it's the opinion of the city's legal counsel that we could proceed with this project. I believe that the auditor still has issues with this project. So if we move forward with this project, I guess, is this something that could eventually end up in the courts? And I guess this question is for Mr. Rasmussen.
Don? Did you hear his question?
Yes.
Okay.
Don, I think I could share if they pass, if this body passes. I speak first and shorten everything up.
Hey, hang on, the question is for Mr. Rasmussen, let's, if you have something relevant.
Yes.
It's up to Mr. Rasmussen to defer.
Would you defer?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Don. If this body passes this legislation, what that means is, based on my duties and Don's opinion, I would sign the legislation you passed, provided it's presented to me properly, and it'd be no different than any other piece of legislation that's presented to me. Does that answer your question, Randy?
It does.
Yep.
Do you need any further comment from Mr. Rasmussen based on that?
I didn't have to say a word.
We really prefer you don't.
God, wonders never cease. A lawyer doesn't speak. I'm sorry. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Paulin.
Question for Jim. Would you be signing a protest letter essentially? If you sign the legislation, no objection?
No.
All right. Any other questions? Hearing none, letter to be filed. Committee reports.
The Appropriations Committee, to whom is referred a request to discuss funding for road paving. We recommend and approve the following. For 6th Street, Main to the railroad east out of Street Department, Railroad to Eagle Creek out of Engineering Funds, Speedway Drive. For Stanford Parkway from Route 12 to Westfield, approve substitutions for, as requested by a city engineer, and waive formal bidding for all 3 sections.
Yes. Well done.
Do I hear a motion to accept the committee report? Mr. Slack.
So moved.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the committee report say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The committee report is accepted.
The Committee of the Whole meeting was held on Tuesday, September 29th, 2020, to discuss the water meter transmitter project via ordinance 2020-92. The Water and Sewer Committee previously met on July 30th, 2020, July 16th, 2020, May 21st, 2020, and March 11th, 2020 to discuss the project. Discussions held concerning ordinance 2020-92. Further discussion was not requested by council. Mayor and auditor disagreed on procedures followed from beginning the project.
Mr. Slack.
I move for acceptance of the Committee of the Whole.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Any discussion? Hearing none. The committee of the whole report is accepted.
The Committee of the Whole meeting was held on Tuesday, September 30th, 2020. Actually, that should be Wednesday, September 30th, 2020, to conduct a pre-budget meeting.
Mr. Russell.
Question, I don't believe that was really a committee of the whole. I think it was, we didn't form it, we didn't do it as a committee of the whole. I don't know if that makes a difference on the agenda. It was simply a pre-budget meeting.
It was my understanding that that was a meeting that was requested by our auditor. I did officially call a committee of the whole. I was not able to attend that evening. I think it was, I'm not sure who wasn't there besides myself, but I think it accomplished what Jim wanted.
Parliamentarian Don, we didn't announce it as a committee of the whole. Do we have to?
Yeah, the meeting was advertised, and there were several council members, I think 6 or 7.
Right.
So you don't worry about the wording of this?
No, not, as long as the meeting was advertised and everybody.
Move to accept the committee report.
Second, Mr. Wobser. Any further discussion? The only discussion I make is the auditor and I will make sure that next year or next time is done with further understanding by everybody. Hearing no other discussion, questions, or comments, all those in favor of the committee of the whole report, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Legislation.
Third reading for Resolution 25, 2020, a resolution stating what services the City of Findlay, Ohio will provide to the territory proposed to be annexed to the City of Findlay, Ohio, situated in Marion Township, County of Hancock, State of Ohio, and being a part of Section 6 South, Township 1 North, Range 11 East, a tract of land consisting of 8.584 acres of land, more or less.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 25-2020.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Mr. Wilson.
Mayor, did we ever find out if we're gonna need to pay the township for ongoing fees like a lot of times we do with annexations?
It is my belief, because I know I looked into that and sent out an email, and if I recall appropriately, we do not, because the property owner is the one requesting to be annexed rather than the city forcing annexation.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of Resolution 25-2020, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Webster?
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 29, 2020. A resolution approving the expenditures made by the Auditor's Office on the attached list of vouchers which either exceed the purchase order or were incurred without a purchase order, exceeding the statutory limit of $3,000, all in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 5705.41D.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 29-2020.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of Resolution 29-2020, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
The resolution is adopted. Ordinances.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-106, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and auditor of the City of Findlay, Ohio to execute all documents necessary to make the benefits of the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters 457 Deferred Compensation Plan, Roth 457 option, available to all Findlay firefighters and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2020-107, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and auditor of the City of Findlay, Ohio to execute all documents necessary to make the benefits of the Ohio Public Employees Deferred Compensation Program, Roth 457 option, available to all City of Findlay employees and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2020-108, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or acting service director of the City of Findlay, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into contracts with optioneers for the purchase of materials, chemicals, and service agreements needed by the various departments of the City of Findlay, Ohio, commencing January 1st, 2021, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move that council's statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2020-108 be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2020-108.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of 2020-108.
Second, Mr. Wobser. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-109, an ordinance authorizing the auditor to make payroll deductions for those employees who have elected to enroll in the health savings account plan and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2020-111, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2020-113, an ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property, referred to as 525 and 529 Davis Street rezone, which previously was zoned R2 single family, low density, to M2 multiple family, high density. Second reading for ordinance 2020-114, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain alley hereinafter referred to as 811 Broad Avenue Vacation in the city of Findlay, Ohio. First reading for ordinance 2020-115, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell?
Move that the council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2020-115 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance 2020-115 its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-115, ordinance 2020-115.
Mr. Wobser?
Motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
And Mr. Russell?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-116, an emergency ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to support the continuation of the governmental electric aggregation program with opt-out provisions pursuant to section 4928.20 of the Ohio Revised Code, the aggregation program, directing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute all electric supply agreement with Energy Harbor and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2020-117, an emergency ordinance authorizing all actions necessary to support the continuation of the governmental electric aggregation program with opt-out provisions pursuant to section 4928.20 of the Ohio Revised Code, the aggregation program, directing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to execute all electric supply agreement with Constellation and declare an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2020-118, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell?
Because this is simply moving money that we are getting from an insurance payment into corresponding funds, funds, I would move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2020-118 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Schindeldecker. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended. I cannot say the word. And the clerk will give 2020-118 its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-118, ordinance 2020-118.
Mr. Hellman?
Move for approval of ordinance 2020-118.
Second, Mr. Wobser. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki. Aye. Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-119, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2020-120, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to waive formal advertising and bidding and enter into an agreement with Helms and Son Excavating for the resurfacing of substitute and additional roadways within the city of Findlay, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Old business. Mr. Greener.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to bring ordinance 2020-092 off of the table.
Second, Mr. Slough. All those in favor of pulling the ordinance off the table, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki. Aye.
Ordinance 2020-092 is off the table. Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2020-092.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Mr. Wilson.
So we've had a lot of discussion around this, and I guess one of the things, and I noticed that on the back of the one of the documents that we had relating back to this had actually the timeline and the expenditures for this project that was on the back of the committee report. And I think one of the things that has not been made readily apparent, or if it has been, it's gotten lost in conversation, is that this entire project, from start to finish, as I read the projections for this project, it's just a little over $5 million total. Now this project, I guess, originally when we started talking about this was around $15 million. And I guess that was one of the things. Jason, do you want to speak to that, what the difference is between the 15 and the 5, and where we're at on this? Or I guess, Brian, I apologize, I didn't even use your authority. But Jason's been sitting right
Here,
there so
I'll,
nice.
because we'll keep things rolling. I can comment real quick, and then they are happy to jump in. So, as you will recall, when we kind of originally started talking about this project, it was if 2G ends tomorrow and we have to replace our entire transmitters for the entire city, what is that going to cost? And when we were looking at that, it was transmitters and meters, because we have had a number of issues over the past couple of years with previous products. And that was really, you know, when you go in, you price out the Mercedes, and then you start saying, what's realistic, what do I need? And you scale it back to what is appropriate and reasonable and works the best to be a good steward of our finances. And so that's really what we have in front of us, is recognizing that over the next couple of years, when 2G dies, we need to be prepared. How can we phase that in by taking action now? The upfront cost has continued to go up because we have a number of transmitters. At this point, we have over 1,000 that are already not working. And so it's how do we get the infrastructure set up? How do we replace our current system to make sure that we are operating most efficiently? And then how do we roll that out over time to upgrade our system to be able to operate over the next number of years and be prepared when 2G goes away. So we went from, if we replaced everything all at once, to here's what we need to do to be set up for the immediate future.
Mr. Wilson.
I'm sorry.
They didn't throw anything at me, so I think I'm all right.
That's good then. So we're asking for appropriations out of $250 out of water, $250 out of sewer, $500,000 total. Can we get that all spent in the last quarter?
That's what we're hoping to do. It'll matter when the product shows up, but that is our plan.
Okay.
See Jason, big nod.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Mr. Russell.
One of the discussions in water and sewer was that Jason's team was gonna how many people they were gonna dedicate to putting these transmitters, to installing them. And they basically had 2, and they also had other duties. And so there was a lot of discussion between Randy, Josh, and myself about what's a reasonable rate we can expect these folks to actually install transmitters. And so the initial, one of the generations of this proposal was to buy like 1,000 transmitters in 2020, and we balked at that and said, you couldn't install 1,000 transmitters, 2 of you, if you started right now and worked the whole time, because other things happen. And so we scaled it. It was kind of our collective idea to scale that back this year, and then come 2021, purchasing more and to try to keep these folks busy doing transmitters, especially focusing on the ones that aren't working currently. And the alternative is that we hire a third party to do these transmitter installations so that our folks can continue to do their day-to-day job. And that was something that that option wasn't presented to water and sewer, something that we discussed but looked at it as being too expensive, and you're better to do it with in-house labor, but that extends the time. And so that's some of the conversation that happened in water and sewer towards that, and the end result is a lower cost in 2020 versus what was originally requested even a couple of months before we actually went to legislation.
Ms. Mayor.
Correct, and that was one of the things we looked at, and we really said, okay, paying somebody a markup on labor doesn't make sense. The other thing is that I know Jason and the team have talked, and folks from water distribution will also in some of their downtime, which they kind of have ups and downs, be able to help assist with that. And as we get some of these transmitters that they're having to go out and manually replace, then that also is allowing them to continue to move and replace them as they're going bad, so that we don't have that time being spent on going out and reading. So we'll be making the shifts, but I know our team's up to the challenge.
Mr. Russell.
And one would hope as they look at which meters to put transmitters on, especially the ones that don't read, they're targeting the meters that are the most difficult to read manually, and those are at the top of the list. And when we have a finite set of resources, we need to be intelligent about how we deploy them, and I think it's a given that that's, and I see all these nods, so I appreciate that.
I was just going to say, I think they're all going to be dancing on their way out, assuming this is, fully passed, and I think they will probably have all been dreaming about which ones they're going to attack first to get them off of their list, as this has been a headache for quite some time. So I know they're excited to get it resolved.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Abstain.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindelbecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wolfser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Did I say Homer? I'm sorry.
Yes, you did, but I'll vote again. Yes.
Vote is 9-0 with 1 abstention. The ordinance is adopted. Any other old business? Hang on, just Mr. Thomas. Anybody from the council? Mr. Thomas, go ahead. Come on down.
The price is right.
Come on.
If I can real quick, and I didn't pick up the add-on legislation, so I think it was number 120, the ordinance that was added on from the Appropriations Committee. I would, since that appropriation does not involve any money, that ordinance, it'd be really nice if that could get approved tonight, so that I can get that paving taken care of yet while the weather's nice. So if council would like to reconsider that, it would be greatly appreciated.
Mr. Wilson.
We can do that.
Mr. President, I'd like to reconsider ordinance 2020-120 and ask that council's rule, can we?
Well, let's get it reconsidered first, and you can. Okay, second, Mr. Schindelbecker. All those in favor of reconsidering 2020-120, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindel?
Sorry. Grant.
Never mind, I apologize.
Aye.
Confused. Mr. Schindlebacher?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Still aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
And if I didn't say, I'm sorry, Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Ordinance 2020-120 is reconsidered. Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2020-120.
We got to suspend first, I'm sorry.
I would move to suspend the rule of council and ordinance number 2020-120 be given its second and third reading.
Ms. Warnicki, second. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindlebacher?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give ordinance 2020-120 a second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-120. Ordinance 2020-120.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2020-120.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance 2020-120 say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindlebacher?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Other old business, Mr. Station.
Yes, thank you. There was a nice article in the paper, I think latter part of last week, early this week, regarding the CARES Act funds. I want to let you all know, we are still in the process of working through some issues as to whether or not you can bulk fund, for lack of a better term, your fire or police services. At some point, this body is going to need to pass a resolution to meet some of those requirements. That seems pretty clear, and you may even want to include police in that resolution. When you do that, you'll have to talk about that amongst yourselves and decide what you want to do. In the meantime, we have, I think today, received documents from the fire chief for us to look at, to start looking at how initially the individuals in his department have been applied that meet the criterion for funding in a non-bulk way, while at the same time we have done that with other departments as well up to this point. And there's been a lot of good things that money's been spent on. The last thought I want to leave you with, so we're making progress. Hope to have a meeting with head of appropriations and the mayor based on a request by the mayor earlier today, but we have not received the additional $1 million+ that we're expecting from the state. The governor signed that last Friday. It should be pushed out of the county sometime in the next week or so. So there's a lot going on. Things continue to evolve. White papers and FAQs and whatnot, some align, some don't, and I think we got some indication of that earlier from Senator McCauley, but I can tell you, Ginger Sampson, your deputy auditor, has done a stellar job, and we have watched an unbelievable number of webinars and read an unbelievable amount of opinions and FAQs on this, and we're going to continue to stay diligent on it so that we keep moving. Good news is, with the governor signing, your deadline has been extended from, I believe it was October 12th or 15th, I think it's 15th to November 20th. So we've got some time here and a little bit of breathing room, and we're going to keep plugging forward. I don't know if there's any questions on that money, but thought you wanted to know that.
Mr. Wilson.
Jim, I'm sorry, the deadline is now, what's the deadline?
I think it's November 20th.
November 20?
Yeah.
So we have plenty of time to get legislation through to get this taken care of?
Yeah, it should get there. And like I say, that's going to evolve from the FAQs, so as you and the mayor and I are talking, we'll get that figured out. So.
Absolutely. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other old business? New business? Mr. Rustin.
Just as a reminder, there is a planning and zoning committee scheduled for this Thursday, October 8th at noon. Two things will be on the agenda that I know of, at least. The reestablishment of the non-conforming use that we had the letter from RCM Architecture at 314 West Sandusky. And also have asked for a report from Hancock Regional Planning on the rezone process and the comment period and the time to get cards back to them for if they didn't want to be included in that mass rezone was, I think, at the beginning of October. So it's a report to us, and then hopefully we'll start to see legislation for the rezone come through council maybe as soon as the second week or the second meeting of October.
Other new business, Mr.
October 8th.
Mr. Russell, is that here? Or
Yes,
is it-
that'll be here. Yeah. Sorry.
Other new business. Yeah, Mr. Hellman.
Jim, this is for the auditor. Is there anything we need to know about this?
Every page.
Can you give me the executive version?
If you don't want the hard copy books, there's a box here, and we'll take it back, because we'll distribute them to bond holders and other people who request them. And it is available online on the city of Findlay website under the city auditor's page.
Other new business. I just want to make a comment to the mayor about a stellar job in getting the census to 98%. Coach Snodgrass would have asked for 110%. But great big pat on the back for getting the message out there and literally getting us to the finish line. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's been a finish line that keeps moving, so I'm proud to report that, based off of courts, you can now still complete the census until now, October 31st. So keeps moving, but 98%, I am very proud of that. If you have not done the census, shame on you. Please resign immediately, because as public officials, you should have been the first to complete it, and I half joke. If I may, continue comments, perfect. Thank you for passing the annual bids. I know that our departments that are trying to buy their chemicals and things ahead, that really appreciate getting that. There was a motorcycle run a couple weeks ago. I'm sure a number of you heard of it. That was Toys for Tots of Hancock County and Abate of Ohio. Mr. Ed that organized that requested that I give a quick summary thanking the city of Findlay for allowing them to do that and working with them. They raised over $26,000 that will go towards Toys for Tots locally, and so that's a great program that we were happy to be a part of. As you noticed, I know Mr. Smoltzer sent out documentation regarding the electric aggregation. You currently have 2 pieces of legislation for electric can't speak tonight either. We're all just so excited because there's so much going on. Electric aggregation. One of them will need to be voted down. One of them will need to move forward, and we would request that those both be, the one that you choose to move forward with, be passed next meeting because of us wanting to lock in those rates. As I'm sure you saw, but it bears repeating, you have one for Constellation and one for Energy Harbor. Energy Harbor was the low bidder by just a couple of cents. However, due to the fact that that is First Energy Company and their ongoing public controversy, wanted to consider, it would be my recommendation to move forward with Constellation as they go through potential legal issues. We don't quite know what that would look like. Given it's just a couple of cents, I think it would be good to just move forward with Constellation, but that's up to you all. Please feel free to reach out to discuss that further if you would like. Thank you so much for passing the transmitters issue. I know that that has been a cumbersome discussion over the last number of years and was much messier than I would have preferred it to be, but I know that ultimately we've reached the right conclusion and it will be a great benefit to the city of Findlay, the residents, in being able to maintain our infrastructure appropriately. And I can guarantee you on behalf of myself and all the departments and the employees that we understand that that is it's expensive, but it's also what needs to be done, and we're going to be the best stewards and project managers and get that moving forward, and we'll show you the benefit that it provides to our citizens. And then just lastly, as Councilman Russell mentioned, that they'll be discussing on Thursday, related to the zoning map update, over 6,000 parcels were notified of rezoning recommendations. Hancock Regional Planning, God bless them, fielded over 600 phone calls in the month of September related to questions on that, and we received approximately 200 opt-outs. So we will provide more information on that, but I felt just wanted to give that quick update. Are there any questions for me? Awesome, thank you.
Any other new business? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Slough, second. Mr. Palmer, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned.